Hello to you all. First of all, I just want to share a real heartfelt thank you to everyone who has listened to these audios so far. I'm grateful for the support you've given this channel. I've been going through all the comments every day, and just given that it's the only engagement that we have so far, I think that's the reason I'm mostly grateful for the connection and to be an observer of this community that's building. I'm grateful that you listen to them. I'm grateful for the time taken, the moment taken to leave me a comment. I find them so encouraging. They leave me feeling affirmed and mostly so humbled, because you all have such generous hearts. And what is a community without people? Having something to share is one thing, but actually having a community that it resonates with, it gives my purpose a home to live and breathe in. So thank you. I started this channel on the 8th of March, 2024, this year. And I remember that day clearly, because what happened was that I was overcome by this energy that had entered my space. And I was going through a process of trying to separate whether it was my energy or not. So I sat down and I did a meditation, followed by a reading, just to unpack what the energy was telling me. And I then started to record it. When I was done, I was sitting with this recording and I had this conundrum, like, what am I going to do with this recording now? Who's it for? Who's going to listen to it? And funny enough, just a couple of weeks back, I'd been going through a different process of, creation. This is the nature of creation. It was taking me time, but I knew that it would all come together. And I came up with this concept of pyramid energy. I'd like to save that story for a different day, but I hadn't packaged it yet. This was part of the recording, the very first recording that I put up on this channel. That was part of the recording, not over prioritizing the packaging and all of that. And that's how I've landed here, with a black background, white text on the topic, and just my voice. And especially because for so long I have wanted to start a YouTube channel, but it never really gained traction, what I would try to do, because I think my heart was not fully in it. And also it just felt like too much effort doing things the way other people do them, showing my face, making sure, I look good on a camera and all of that. And it was kind of losing the essence of what I had to share. And so I just decided, I've got this concept, pyramid energy, now a logo. So I went to AI, tried to figure out what logo am I going to do and use. And I was like, you know what? You need to get this message out. So I landed on a black background with a white triangle, and I posted it. From then on, I had no clear picture of what would become of it. And so every day I let spirit lead. There are days I don't post, and there are days that I do. And I know that whenever I do, that is the message that I'm meant to share. But what's been such a blessing to observe has been just the last few days. Because that video, the very first video, has had the most engagement on this channel. But just in the last 3 or 4 days, it has really picked up. And given the message in that channel, what it's telling me is that this energy has just shifted into everyone feeling kickstarted to engage their art, their creation, and their purpose, and to release whatever's blocking them from taking the next step. So I just want to say, I am so proud of you all. I'm also proud of myself. I'm going to say that. I know a lot of channels have people sharing advice, and I don't know whether YouTube is so big, but it feels new to me to open myself up to share with you as I receive and as I'm learning. At this point in time with you all, I'm also going through my own process of birthing something different. This is the nature. It's always evolving. I also think it's one of the most beautiful things to co-create, because there are no limits when you're co-creating. A lot of things that we engage in our lives have almost a predefined start and a predefined end, a beginning point and a end point, a limit. When you're co-creating, there are no limits. So you have to be open to change. You have to be open to whatever the path opens up into. And that takes a lot of courage. That takes a lot of courage. And it's not just courage that it takes a real commitment to work on yourself, to believe in yourself, and also to trust the journey you're on, the journey you've been through, and the journey you're on. There are a couple of comments that I've seen that have sat with me for longer than I expected. The types of comments where you can't just put a heart. I like this. The kind of comment where you can't just say thank you. The kind that leaves me feeling like there's more to be said here. One thing that has been such a big part of my journey in a way that I could never have known when I was in the thick of it is depression. And I mean, I am an empath, and depression is easily pointed out as the villain of the story. But in my story, and hindsight is always 20/20, in my story, it has easily been my biggest gift. I just want to go and read to you what Google says depression is. It says that depression is a mood disorder that causes a persistent feeling of sadness and loss of interest. Also called major depressive disorder or clinical depression, it affects how you feel, think, and behave, and can lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems. Just to reiterate that, what it says is that the depression is what affects how you feel, think, and behave. And it's the depression that can lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems. This has not been my experience. Maybe at the time when I needed information, that was my experience. But in hindsight, it definitely has not been my experience. I thought it was worth looking into the word depression, depressed, a bit more. And it comes from a Latin word, I don't know how to pronounce it, deprimere, means to press down. And when I thought about this, I realized that what made me depressed was the pressing of me down. My true nature, myself, the things that I wanted to express in the world that had no room to be expressed in the life that I was living. And so, change is not an easy thing to embrace. We have natural emotions that come up. There's fear of many things, fear of things falling apart, fear of not making things work, not being able to pay for things, not, being able to meet the standards expected of one. And I suppose that's also where courage comes in. But more than anything, I have found that the biggest healer of depression is truly one's soul purpose and one's feeling that there's something more inside. This is what I've discovered is the biggest healer of depression is this thing that you are working to create. when you're co-creating with God, with spirit, whatever we all want to call it, to even access that voice clearly, that takes a lot of work. And when I say a lot of work, I don't mean slugging and, heavy work. I mean a commitment to oneself and a commitment to shift one's perspective, to be open to a different perspective, to be open to one's heart and what it has to say against all other voices that we constantly hear every day. Sometimes it's the voices of doubt in one's own head, but often it's the outside world, the one that holds these expectations of us. And so it takes a lot of inner work, commitment to unpack these parts of yourself, to uncover this gold that's inside. This gold that only you know is gold. It sits dormant for the longest time. And I'm a writer, so I've been writing about this specifically. What I'm doing here now, I've been writing about this for 2.5 years. 2.5 years ago, a lot of things in my life started to change, and almost beyond my control. Some of them by choice, some of them beyond my control, my health being one, because the other problem with depression is that, one of the solutions, obviously therapy is a solution, definitely, but another solution is medicating it, to get it under control. And that comes with a whole lot of other things, and I don't want to get too much into the medical side of things, but actually I will a little bit. If anything, it will emphasize my point. But my journey with depression began in my early 20s, and it was probably something like 14 years after that I was diagnosed with high blood pressure, asthma, an overactive pulse, and some other autoimmune markers. Doctors couldn't figure out what it was. I mean, for all intents and purposes, everything in my life appeared fine. But my body wasn't okay. My body wasn't happy. And although all of my ailments were treated, I was gaining more and more and more. I was collecting friends that I didn't need in my life. And so even though everything looked fine to other people, it got to the point where I was starting each day with all these pills and an asthma pump. And I just thought, I rely on these things to keep me going and to sustain this life. And not just that, I was also overweight, my lower legs were swollen, my body just was not happy. And I think that's the point where I felt I'd had enough. I'd had enough of not having happiness as a daily feature in my life. And from that point, things around me started to change. Like I said earlier, some of those things were my own decisions, but a large number of those things were not. And the only power that I can attribute that, the only thing that I have physically here on earth that I could attribute those changes to in my life, was the wishes of my heart. The heart is very powerful. I will always say the heart always wins. And in my case, I didn't listen to my heart. I took my depressed heart and I suppressed it more. And I ignored it. And I continued to build a whole lot of things around it, not allowing it to have a voice. And so then it started to attack other parts of my body. I know that this was the cause because 2.5 years ago, that's when I started to write, actively writing into my notes. That's when I started to write. That's when I started to explore the esoteric. That's when I started to really listen to what it is I want to do, not knowing clearly what it's going to look like in the end, knowing it will lead me somewhere. Who knows where somewhere is at this point? But knowing that, I kept listening to my heart and going with what my heart was telling me to do. And it sounds insane, but a year into that, I became medication free. Not just that, everything felt like I was more not in control, but that the direction I was moving in was inspiring me. I found it inspiring. Again, I didn't know what it was going to look like in the end, but I was committed to a journey, however slow, that was on an upward trajectory, in my personal opinion, because my heart can back that. My heart just couldn't back what I was doing before. And for me, that's the importance of listening to the heart. That is the importance of really diving into oneself and being committed to whatever it is that you want to create, even if you can't see the end point, to work on yourself. And yes, there is a waiting period, if we want to call it that. But don't use that waiting period waiting. That waiting period is more like incubation. Because honestly, if I look at the difference between myself now and that 2.5 years ago, 2 years ago, when I pull out writing I wrote then, the only difference between myself then and myself now is the readiness for this moment and the openness to forget everything that I know and learn anew. And really, when I look at some of the things that I wrote down 2 years ago, when I compare that version of myself to this version of myself, knowing that I wanted to start a YouTube channel back then, the only difference was that I had so much growing that I needed to do, a lot of stripping, in order to be able to hear that voice that I do channel, to be able to access these depths of myself that were always there, but generally hidden in my notes, and at a time where I didn't feel worthy enough, courageous enough to know that there's someone out there who wants to hear it. So it's the self-work I'm talking about. It's the commitment to yourself. I don't see this as difficult work as such. The journey is not easy, but I see it as a decision more than anything. It's like once you knock on that door, it's going to answer. Once you open that box, there will be something in there. And one day, you're going to get told almost, listen, there's always a message in the box. So you can't just walk past that box constantly. It's like that decision changes everything. That same box that's always been sitting in your house, one day you decide you're going to look in it. And from that day going forward, it's impossible to walk past that box without going to check what's in it. It's just checking what's in it. And then sitting with that information. Sitting with it. And when I say sitting with it, I don't mean a full-on meditation. I don't mean this now needs to become a daily task. I mean, let it sit inside you. Acknowledge its presence. Carry on with everything you need to do. Do what's right in front of you in your life. We all have things that we have to get done. But let it be. Somehow, our own spirits know how to work with that information. And if we are open to the answers, and if we are open to what is there to be learned, it comes to the surface. And so for me, writing, taking down notes, whether it's, courses I've created, poems I've written, all this stuff, I have tons of writing in my notes. Never known what exactly to do with it, how to package it. But I realize now that none of that matters. What matters is that the writing happens, that whatever information that is that could be fleeting, that it's captured. Because when one day, when you're ready to go back to it, it'll be there. When this body of yours and this mind of yours is ready to fetch that information, it will be there. And it will all also it just comes together and makes sense. And this 2.5 years easily has been the most difficult of my life. I started coming up for air 6 months ago, but also the most beautiful part of my life, because that's where I was able to see, in slowing down and in really going inside and taking stock of myself and who I've become, or who I've remembered I am, I suppose I should say. This has all been happening. To look at things like this in hindsight is the most beautiful experience, has been the most beautiful experience of my life, because some of the stuff, I'm like, you can't make this shit up. You just can't make it up. And so I think it's really important that in the most difficult times of our lives, we're open to the perspective of as within, so without. That we're open to the idea and the truth that everything happens on the inside first. And it's okay. So if one feels that inside is too difficult, I mean, there are tools for that. There are tools for that. If you feel inside is too difficult, there are tools. But to turn outwards to look for solutions is to turn away from yourself. It's a self-rejection. And another thing that comes to mind is whenever the word depression comes up for me from anyone, I always say, the deeper the pain, the deeper the opportunity for joy. So I took some notes to share with you of things I've learned from this transitionary period of my own life that I feel are worth sharing. The first thing I had to believe is that I came here to live a good life. A life I was happy in and felt proud of. A life where I would make an impact. The second thing, I had to learn to acknowledge fear, but also to train my mind to remember that while fear is a natural emotion, giving it a front row seat was irrational, because that meant that the life I wanted would have to sit at the back of the bus, crying, staying in bed, over-explaining myself, trying too hard, unable to show up, medicated, slowly becoming bitter and forgetting how to be happy. 3, I had to constantly remind myself that my life belonged to me and nobody else, and that my life was the most important thing ever to exist to me, because everyone else has the same obligation, whether they show up for that or not, and that nothing anyone else does or says can negate my own responsibility and my ability to show up as my best version for them. In order to be accountable to myself, I had to learn to hold others accountable to themselves. 4, I had to be gentle on myself. To learn that I am on a stream, that I don't always know which direction it will flow and what lies ahead, but that the only way to get over those bumps unscathed, I would need to relax, not strain myself, and not become fixed so that the river can carry me safely. 5, I had to be willing to walk through my past. Not once, and also not all at once, but as many times as was needed, to unpack what led me down the path I'd taken and the places I was in, to review mindsets and perspectives that didn't serve me, to take back what I needed and to leave the rest. I had to retrieve parts of myself that I'd lost along the way, whether it was in false stories I'd told myself or that I'd been told by others. 6, I had to embrace the gift of solitude, to learn that privacy is a form of freedom and peace for a given time, because that is where life can happen at my own pace, rather than on the pace of others who expect so much of me. I needed space. I needed space to learn who I was again, to not be reminded what I wasn't doing, who I wasn't anymore, what I didn't have enough of. I needed space from all the constant reminders to revert to a life that I knew wasn't for me anymore. I know this sounds so drastic, but again, it's a mindset thing. It's choosing not to engage in certain conversations. It's embracing privacy rather than feeling accountable to people who aren't actually living my life. I needed to build a house of my own making that I would be content with. 7, I had to be patient, and I had to figure out ways to not fill that time with waiting, but to fill it with more and more and more and more of myself. And 8, in my most fragile, unable to see ahead times, I had to allow myself to completely fall apart, to surrender to my scariest emotions, my darkest fears about myself, and the ability of my heart to cope. Instead of succumbing to the temptation to harden my heart, I would submit to it. I would sink into it and wait to see if I would drown. I never drowned. Instead, I felt as though a thunderstorm had passed. You know, that energy of peace where you're not too sure what has been destroyed, but you're just grateful that you weren't. Another unexpected result of this surrender was that during the period after, I would notice my intuition deepen, as if being willing to fall into the depths of the water, never to return, is to fetch what is only available there. And with that, and obviously if you've listened up to this point, I want you to know just how grateful I am, because I thought it would be a long time before I actually even opened up to this extent on such a personal level. But you have given me the same through your comments. And mostly I just want you to know that, at least from me, we aren't alone. It's clear to me now that we are not alone. There are, I'm sure, many other ways to create. But when you're walking in the dark, it means so much to have a community and people, like-minded people to connect with, to remind you you're not alone, to remind you you're not crazy, and to remind you that there is a purpose to this thing that you dream of creating. Sending you all infinite blessings and gratitude.